Joe Duffy, CEO of OffshoreInsiders.com. This video, I'm going to tell you about how to win in the NBA playoffs, and all I've been doing is winning publicly since the 1988-89 NBA playoff season. Picked up quite a few things along the way, had some theories, and then was able to test them as computer software got better and better and better. And there is a reason why I do win year in and year out in the NBA playoffs, and I want to give you some of my secrets. Most importantly, please do me a favor. Can you like and subscribe? Like this video. It says, Joe Duffy, I want you to do even more strategy videos. And in fact, you can even in the comments section say, tell me what you'd like me to discuss in future videos. Not just the free picks, but even in the strategy videos like this. And this is how we win in the NBA playoffs. And by the way, please follow me on all socials, including X at Offshore Insider. Now remember, the website is offshoreinsiders.com, but because of the limitations, the character limitations that were on X, it's Offshore Insider on my socials. All right, let's start out with the ZigZag theory. Probably a lot of you have heard of this. This goes back many, many years. I know when I was on the score phones, there was a guy by the name of Tony Salinas who loved this. The ZigZag is fairly self-explanatory. People would believe that you basically bet on the team that lost the previous game. They would bounce back and cover the next game. If I were actually renaming it, I would call it a bounce back angle. Now, does that actually work? Well, the answer is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. All time in the history of my database, if you blindly bet that ZigZag, that is a team that lost the previous game, it would be, of course, series game 2 or later. They would be 8-10, 754, and 19. That's a mere 58.1%. And in fact, to be honest with you, it even dropped below 500, but it's been very good since 2021. 161, 113, and 3. And I think it makes sense. It's not so much that it's just cyclical. It's not pure luck. I think there's a legitimate reason behind that. First of all, the odds makers have to adjust not just for sharp action, but also square action. They know that there's more Joey Bag of Donuts than ever out there betting because of the legalization of sports gambling, and that they have to know that there are so many gamblers who do just the opposite. They're in the recency bias. They saw one team dominate game 1. They're like, oh, Philadelphia couldn't match up against Miami in game 1. They're going to get crushed in game 2. So the public generally likes to bet on the team that looked good. So therefore, that the lines are usually shaded towards the teams that look good, and then therefore the teams that look bad, that are off of a loss, there's going to be some pretty good value. Also, though, and I think this is very important, there's more variables, and it can get a little crazier and a lot more fluid with it so high scoring now with all the rules, from you can barely touch a player, but also on an offensive rebound, of course, you don't reset the shot clock to 24. So with the scoring is up, I do think it definitely makes a lot more sense that there's going to be a lot more, so-called zigzagging from one game to the next. Now, that angle that I told you, it's actually a fantastic 135, 80, and 3 if the team off of a loss didn't lose their previous game by 20 points or more. So, yeah, therefore, if one team blew out the other in the previous game, maybe there's a lot more adjustments that do need to be made. But if it's not a blowout loss, teams really bounce back off of the loss in the playoffs. And if it's a loss as a favorite, they really zigzag or bounce back. Teams off a loss as a favorite since 2020, 81, 39, and 1. Now, as a general rule of thumb, favorites do pretty well. They do really well in round 1. But laying 2 or more, and if a team's laying 2 or more, that generally means that they're going to remain the favorite. You're not going to see a team go from a favorite to an underdog, or obviously vice versa. So when a team is laying 2 or more, so they're a fairly clear favorite, they are 950, 797, and 24. That being said, got to be honest with you, it is 3 games under 500 the last 2 years. So it's, hasn't been quite as dominant recently. And of course, as I file this, by the way, I'm entering the 2026 playoffs. Now, this is really, like I said, pretty much consistent with contrarian information. Contrarian information actually does work better in the NBA playoffs. Why? Because it's a rare time that the public actually likes to bet underdogs. The public almost always likes to bet favorites. The exception is they like betting quality underdogs, and especially when it comes to the playoffs, the teams that the public actually likes to bet underdogs, and therefore the odds makers shade it, and the favorites become good value. Also, in the current era, with teams resting players, the so-called load management, I do think in the first round of the playoffs, the better teams are going to have more rested players. So that's another one of the reasons. Admittedly, there's probably I have to be careful retrofitting. Favorites do especially well in round one and the NBA Finals. But again, it definitely makes sense in the NBA Finals because the public, if a team's in the NBA Finals, it's almost always a very good team unless you got some incredible Cinderella team. But of course, you're always going to have a team that's hot. So that's the one time that the public loves underdogs. When they're good teams and when they're hot and to make it to the finals in any sport, that's going to be the case. So it doesn't surprise me in the least that favorites do pretty well in the NBA Finals. Laying 12 or more, 45, 31, and 1, and that's really held up well over the years. But you can see where the one time maybe teams want to make statements would be in round one of the playoffs. Once they get past round one, they're just worried about winning. But yeah, you can see teams are in a little bit more of a statement mode in round one. Unders are generally a pretty good play, especially as the series goes on. In games 6 and 7, those games go under at a 148, 109, and 6 rate. The only thing that makes me nervous about that is an overwhelming majority of my systems are clearly counterintuitive. Like betting with slumping teams and bad teams. But this is one that makes too much sense. That's why it does make me a little bit nervous. But there's no question that, first of all, the defensive intensity increases in the playoffs. And yes, when a team is facing elimination, which one team's going to be facing elimination in Game 6, and both teams will be facing elimination in Game 7, defensive intensity goes up. So it's not surprising, only except from my mind where, like I said, most things are counterintuitive. This is clearly intuitive. Games 6s and 7s especially are big underplays. And if for the previous game they didn't exceed the total by 22 or more, it goes under 142, 96, and 4 in those games 6s and 7. But there are outliers. We not only know the rules, I know the exceptions to the rule. Big overs, maybe somewhat surprisingly, are followed by another over. And it's a little surprisingly because the total usually goes up. By the way, important thing for me to mention, these are kind of master angles. Joe Duffy's picks at offshoreinsiders.com. I've got tightened up angles, even better angles than what I'm quoting. These are the master angles. I have the refined and enhanced and turbo versions of this. But yeah, if a previous same series game went over by 21 or more, it's an over at 88, 69, and 7 for 56.1%. And yes, that does include games 6s and 7. Now, here's another good one. If both teams are big under teams, and frankly, you're not going to see teams this late in the season, it's somewhat rare, when both teams for the entire year go under by an average of at least 2 points per game, so-called sweat barometer, so to speak. Season to date, both of these teams have been clear under teams. Those games go over 48, 26, and 1. So now we're finally getting back to counterintuitive. Yes, under teams tend to go over. Surprise to many of you, not a surprise to us sharps and those of you who have been tailing us sharps. Because remember, NFL and NBA are the top two regression to the mean sports. College basketball, a little bit more about momentum. College football kind of varies, but the NFL and the NBA are definitely about regression to the mean. And so, yeah, that does go over since 2009, even bigger over rate, 36, 16, and 2. You want to lock in long-term to Joe Duffy's picks at offshoreinsiders.com. Make sure you like and subscribe. I'm going to give you free picks and more handicapping strategy videos just like this.